Greetings, gentlemen. This is Ohio Dan. I wanted to make a video that should be a pretty quick topic to cover. This is not something that is all that complicated, but I still see some men within the community and some women within the men's community as a whole talking about how we're going to defeat feminism and feminism's bad and we need to undo the damage that feminism has done so that men and women can get together and have healthy connections and relationships again. And this is just sort of the final verdict. A lot of you guys are probably on the same page as me already with this, but you're not going to defeat feminism, right? Ultimately, the problem is that we live in a post-feminist society, and the modern gender narrative is completely defined by this. Feminism has won every battle that it wanted to fight. The only difference now is you have more and more radical implementations of feminism. And I'm not saying you can't speak out against these things. I'm not saying that it's not getting worse over time, but it's not because the ideology of feminism is changing. It's just because they are now in a position to make things even harder for men over time. And again, when it comes to women getting the right to vote, based basically on nothing other than they were supposedly oppressed and didn't have the right to vote for that reason. Not that men could potentially be drafted or just in general be expected to die for their country, and that's why they were allowed to vote and women weren't up until first wave feminism. It's because the patriarchy. And then women deserve the right to abortion of convenience and the right to birth control with second wave feminism, and then third wave feminism with equality across the board, equality of outcome, regardless of whether it really makes any sense or women even want those jobs or positions. And then fourth wave feminism, which is just open man-hating. Men are to blame for everything. We should just be able to accuse men without due process of anything we want, listen, and believe. All this is based on the same ideology, right? All this is based on feminism just making things more difficult for men over time, but not because things have really changed in terms of the status quo, just in terms of just the sort of natural progression of this very corrupt, hypocritical, intellectually dishonest ideology. And the vast majority of people ultimately support feminism. They may not support the results of third and fourth wave feminism, but they do support, at the very least, first wave feminism. The vast majority of people think that women should just have the right to vote based on, oh, they're women. They should just be able to do that. And some of them will try to redefine what they're talking about in terms of, well, everyone should have the right to vote. And I guess that's fair enough, but that's not the system that we have. We have a system like in the United States where men are still potentially eligible for the draft and to have to go into the military where women don't have that obligation. And it's been, over 100 years since first wave feminism reached its goals? I'm not going to go into how feminism is just clearly not about equality. In reality, it's about controlling men, and it's about creating a system where women are the upper caste and then men have a different set of rules that they have to follow. I'm not going to get into that much here because it's just clear with the one-sided reproductive rights, gender roles, Me Too, the way that domestic violence laws are written, the way the family courts work. It's just clear that there's nothing equal when it comes to how these different facets of feminism treat men and women. It's just clear that it's not about equality. But the thing about it is that we cannot go back to a time before feminism happened, given these developments. Too much damage has been done. The impact over generations, where women now believe that they're special and they're equal and they're victims of the patriarchy, all at the same time, just based on whatever happens to give her what she wants. This is just too much of a mainstay. It is too much of an embedded part of how things are between men and women today to just undo. It's not going to happen like that. The only way to move forward is to acknowledge feminism and gynocentric reality as it is today as the baseline, and then proceed on that basis in an attempt to fix our problems. And this is just even theoretically, right? We have to acknowledge that feminism has won if we're ever going to move to anything else, and we're probably not going to collectively. individually as men, we can move on to other things and pretty much just turn our backs to this feminist society. But overall, at the macro level, you're not going to undo the damage that's been done. And very few people, of course, in positions of power are willing to even entertain moving on from this. Everything is about how women feel. Everything is about what women want. Even your opposition, supposedly conservative parties like the Republicans, they're always talking about how, well, if you support the abortion laws, then you're putting women in danger because abortion can hurt women, or something of that nature. Something where it's about protecting women in a roundabout way, or it's about, oh, these migrants are coming in and hurting women, and so we need to stop immigration, at least illegal immigration, because we need to protect the women at home from being attacked by these foreigners. Like, even the conservatives and the right-wing people are basically just trying to twist feminism and gynocentrism to support their ideological narrative, but they're not really anti-feminist, not really in any practical sense. And I remember many years ago, Marcus from the Groundwork for the Metaphysics of MGTOW talked about this within the men's community itself. There are very few truly anti-feminist women within the men's community because most of them are just saying, I'm against what third and fourth wave feminism do, but I'm all for women having the right to vote based on nothing. I'm all for women having the right to abortion of convenience in some cases, but I'm not for men getting railroaded in the family courts the way that they are, or I'm not for Me Too, and I'm not for women not doing anything in the home. Women should be more traditional and all that kind of stuff. But the point is that none of it does diddly poo to reverse what feminism has actually done. You're not going to accomplish that, in my opinion. As a result of where things generally stand in a post-feminist society, any attempt to break feminism's dominance, in terms of it being the dominant gender ideology at least, is probably a lost cause. You're not going to do that. You're not going to change the system. You're not going to get people to realize that we need to move on to something else, because it's already a battle that's been lost. It's already a war that's been over for many decades. Once you allowed women to take control of this political system through feminist ideology, that particular brand of thinking at least, you were never going to reverse the damage that was done over all this time, right? It was only going to lead to this sort of outcome, even from first wave feminism on, in my opinion. And so it's not really worth engaging in this effort to defeat feminism at this point, or to essentially overcome what feminism's done. In theory, we could work together to move on from feminism to something else instead of trying to fight against feminism directly. But again, nobody really wants to do that in positions of power. And to me, this is the sort of biggest limitation on that, is you have to convince women, the majority of women, that they need to give up the privileges and advantages that they have, that they can't be special and equal and a victim all at the same time, just depending on what they happen to want from men, that they have to be held to a standard. They have to be accountable for their own actions and choices. Women will never go along with that. You'll have your occasional women that are wired to think more like guys that will understand that living in a post-feminist society is not sustainable. The man-hating, this idea that women deserve more no matter what, this idea that men just need to do better and take accountability for women's choices, that's not sustainable. But the vast majority of women will never be willing to move beyond feminism. They think with their feelings, and their feelings tell them that you don't have to be reasonable, it doesn't have to make sense, I'm special, I'm equal, I'm a victim of the patriarchy. And so they're going to continue to support what feminism has done because it benefits them in the short run, even if they're more miserable in the long run, and even if men have no willingness and no reason to be a part of things like marriage and creating families anymore. So the whole point of saying all this, guys, is just to basically have a final verdict, at least from my point of view. It's not up to me to have the last say, really, but to completely dismiss the idea that defeating feminism is a part of the overall solution at this point. You can't defeat something that has already become so deeply embedded in society. You can't defeat something that has already become the dominant gender ideology for over 100 years and just continues to become more and more extreme because that's the natural development of the ideology, frankly. You can't defeat something that, along with that, is so full of hypocrisy and mutual contradictions and just emotional thinking that you can't really argue against it anyway. And this is what most women and a large percentage of men, maybe even most men, are going to support at some level. You're not going to overcome that. You can try to move on to something else. You can try to say, all right, we know we live in a gynocracy, but we want things to be better, but I don't really see a way of actually improving things. That's sort of a different topic where you could talk about why it is that we can or can't move on to something else, and will it take society just collapsing completely in order to move on from feminism? I really think that, yeah, probably that's the case. But even if you wanted to improve things between men and women, it's not really about fighting against feminism at this point. It's way, way too late to do that. And this kind of goes along as a final point with what I've said in the past, where you can tell if the conversation remains about feminism or about real gender equality or about men and women just working together to solve our problems instead of being divided and being set against each other, right? We can't let the powers that be cause us to hate one another as men and women. All this nonsense that doesn't amount to anything in terms of actually changing things so that men have a reason to want to participate in relationships, or really just dealing with women again in many cases, or trusting women in the workplace and so on. You see all these rhetorical devices, you see all this sort of stuff that's put out there, and it just doesn't amount to anything. As long as this is still the conversation that's being had, nothing's going to change to improve the lives of men. Nothing's going to get better along these lines. If we move on to something that is more sustainable, in theory, I don't know what that would look like. I don't really want to say traditionalism because that's dead too, but whatever form it takes, if we were going to save this society in terms of having men and women work together again, it has to be a lot more than just defeating feminism. It has to be a lot more than this empty nonsense about how men and women should just work together again and wave the magic wand and pretend like men's legitimate issues aren't issues anymore. It has to take the form of real concrete things. It has to take the form of women actually getting together and marching against Me Too, or saying that if they have the right to abortion of convenience, men should have the right to paternal surrender, or we should just do away with all that. It would have to take the form of actually reforming the family courts, and none of this is going to happen in all likelihood. So all this stuff about defeating feminism and uniting together men and women against feminism, all that's not going to work. At this point, it's way too late. It's been way too late for a long time, really. And that kind of stuff can be easily dismissed as just not really doing what it takes to resolve anything. And men are better off still, in my opinion, just considering an alternative to having a family, trying to date women, trying to negotiate with the women out there in everyday life. The alternative is to basically live for yourself in some form and find the things that you think are important. And if there are certain women in your family or certain women that you have vetted thoroughly and actually trust with good reason, then that's fine. But this idea of just moving away from feminism and working with women again, it's never going to happen. It isn't something that is viable. And again, if we really wanted to move on towards something else, that's what we'd need to do. But just defeating feminism isn't going to accomplish anything at this point, and it's way too late to try to do things on that basis.